entire fishing industry as well. The most impactful attribute of the Yamacraw, and what really sets it apart, is that it's constructed from our new Mega Floater formula. This is the same formula that we use when creating the popular Ned Cinco and hot new Slinko. This formula allows for a soft feel and a bait that floats. This formula allows you to rig the Yamacraw countless ways, and it will stand up when it hits the bottom and mimic the natural defense posture of a crawfish. These same properties also make the Yamacraw the best football jig trailer ever. The claws float and allow you to move the bait at super slow speeds, slower than any other crawl out there, and still get the desired kicking action. Finally, and maybe the most importantly, when you stop your jig, the claws will float up and seal the deal on any fish within eyeshot. Available in 20 fish-catching colors and comes 6 per pack in Yamamoto's new clamshell packaging. The all-new Yamacraw is pro-tested, nature-inspired, and fish-approved. To learn more about the new Yamacraw, visit us at baits.com.
Hello, I'm Davy Hite. I fished the Bassmaster Tournament Trail for 24 years, 24 of the greatest years of my life, no doubt, because I was living a dream. To be able to pursue a dream that I had from the time I was 11 years old. Just a kid with a dream, and yeah, I don't take for granted the fact that I've been so blessed to be able to pursue my dream and then have some success in that dream. Glad you guys could join me, guys and gals, whoever's joining me here tonight. Looking forward to the next 50 minutes, hour, something like that. Spending time together. I'm gonna talk about a lot of Yamamoto products, some Buckeye stuff, maybe even get in some old stories about techniques and the reason for some of the tips and the reason I've been able to learn through trial and error and a lot of error through the years, no doubt about it. So I'm gonna get started a little bit, and I hope a lot of people are going to be able to join us this evening. And I know so many people think about my success with a mop jig. Well, behind that mop jig has been Yamamoto trailers. I get asked what trailer, what jig, and all that. So I'm definitely going to get into that. I'm going to wait a few minutes. Maybe some more people will join us in a little bit. I'm going to spend a lot of time on that because I'm super, super excited about the Yamacraw. And I'll for sure explain the reasons why. But I want to start out with something that a lot of folks that I talk to, I'm doing seminars still like I did when I was fishing the Bassmaster Elite Series. I enjoy doing those. I enjoy getting to meet people. This coming weekend, I'm going to be in Raleigh, North Carolina at a big sports show. The Gray brothers are having me there. I've been working with them for a very, very long time. Look forward to meeting people that a lot of them in cases I haven't maybe seen in a number of years because, they live in that North Carolina, Virginia area, or just some new friends and people that love the sport. I'm so passionate about this sport because, number one, I had a dream, and to be able to live your dream is just, if you haven't been able to do that so far in your life, I certainly hope everyone can do that because it means so much. But the other thing is, I just love people that love the outdoors in general, whether it's hunting, fishing, or just boating, maybe not even white fishing, because we all kind of seem to have that common denominator. It's just people that enjoy and appreciate the outdoors. And that's Davy Hite, and that's what I do. I'm competitive, and that's what drives me. That's what drove me to fish tournaments at a very young age. Back in those days when I was 11 and 12 years, 13 years old, there were no other kids my age at those tournaments. I mean, zero. Now you see kids everywhere. They're 12 and 13, 14 years old. I just talked to a parent today that's got a 16-year-old son that really, really, we're trying to work out something where I can, go and help him a little bit with his fishing. Don't know if it can happen because we're also very, very busy. But things like that are so important to me because I love the sport. I feel like I owe back to the sport. So any questions you have during this hour, feel free to ask. I'll try to get to them all, but I'm gonna kind of get in seminar mode right now for a second or two. You send those questions and we'll get into them in a few minutes. But I want to talk about a few key baits, and there again, I'm not going to start with the Yamacraw or the flapping hog and the mop jig. Certainly going to get into that. But I want to talk about the D-shad. You know, this is a bait that I use a lot. The last Bassmaster Elite Series tournament here in my home state in Lake Murray, which we're going to be back at this year on the Bassmaster Elite Series, is where I grew up. That was my training grounds, so to speak, my proving grounds. Fished little small tournaments, just like everyone else. Is kind of where I got started. Once I was old enough to officially be able to fish in Bass Federation type tournaments, man, I thought, well, I'm a grown man now. I'm 16. I can actually fish these tournaments. I thought I'd never get that old. Been a long time ago, obviously. That being said, that tournament at Lake Murray, I finished second in. And the thing about bass fishing tournaments, no matter what level, but especially as you progress up the chain, so to speak, at the Bassmaster Elite level, everything has to go perfect. It's not easy to win. Have a good finish, but you want to win, because if you fish a number of tournaments, if you have competitors, 50, 100, 150, 200, 400 competitors in one event, you realize it's hard to win, to close the deal. And that's something that I always kind of took pride in, trying to close the deal. Certainly didn't work out that way in my career every time. I think I had 8 second place finishes and 8 or 9, I think it was 9 wins on the Bassmaster Tournament Trail. So obviously I had as many seconds as I did first, or within one. So I finished second just almost as many times. There to say, had a great tournament. Had, in most of those scenarios, I had one little thing that went wrong. And you remember those little things, especially my second place in the Bassmaster Classic. I remember the exact fish that I lost the day that I only weighed in 4 fish. And finished second to George Cochran by exactly 1 pound. The fish I lost was not a giant, but it was a Bassmaster Classic winning fish, a 1.5 pound fish, solid 1.5 pounds. So you always remember those things. But this bait helped me finish second in that tournament on Lake Murray. And actually had several opportunities in that event to win. It wasn't meant to be. I lost 2 fish that if I had it to do over again 1,000 times, I believe you may have done that in my head, I wouldn't have done anything any differently. It just wasn't meant to be. I surely would have loved to win a Bassmaster event on my home lake. In those previous events there, I have a second, third, and a fourth in Bassmaster events on Lake Murray. So got close a lot of times, but closing the deal didn't quite work out on that particular level. So here's the deal. Here's the difference in this bait, the D-Shad, Yamamoto D-Shad. Obviously, a lot of great colors. A lot of salt in this bait is very, very important. And we're going to get into, especially with the Yamacraw and a couple of the other baits, how maybe not so much salt in some of the other baits is advantageous. But this bait is very, very important. I want this bait to sink like your original sinking Senko. I want it to sink fast. But the really cool thing, and I helped a little bit with this bait, might have had something to do with the name D-Shad. I don't know. But what I wanted this bait to do is obviously to fall and to have a good action when it's falling, but I also wanted it to swim. And it doesn't have that button tail or a tail like you see on most swim baits. It's slender. So I wanted it to swim, but not give a lot of vibration. Very, very important. I'll talk about that with jigs and other flipping baits. You know, your Senko has a lot of vibration, a lot of movement, but not as much noise, not moving as much water, which makes a sound in the water. The fish can feel that. So there's a big, big difference there. This bait, and there are a lot of good soft plastic jerk baits, because that's kind of what we categorize these as. Gosh, I remember, I guess the first one was a Sluggo. The first one that I remember was a Sluggo. But, you know, that's been a long time ago, obviously. A lot of good soft plastic jerk baits. This particular bait has a good combination of fishing it slow, the fall and the quiver in the fall, not exactly like the Senko, but similar. But then the other thing, when you reel it fast, when those fish, you know, get excited, the smallmouth, I've got video, I know multiple times up at Thousand Islands, St. Clair, places like that. Actually won a tournament at St. Clair on a soft plastic jerkbait. Sometimes those fish just get excited when something moves fast and they want to chase. And we all know that's a secret to catching smallmouth at times, but largemouth get turned on by that some also. So this is a bait that I can fish slowly, the Yamamoto D-Shad. I can fish slowly, and I can fish it from the surface or just under the surface, I guess, slowly. Now also I can fish it down, 6, 7, 8 feet deep. You have to really pay attention and be focused in on what you're doing if you're fishing this bait down a little deeper, because you just see a tick of your line. You'll just see a little movement, because you don't want to be, pausing and then twitching that bait and let that fish feel you. You can do it with a jerk bait if you've got treble hooks on, because you're going to hook that fish. But with this bait, typically you've got that hook buried in there. You're fishing around some kind of cover, vegetation, wood, whatever. You want it to come through standing timber. I've done, had a lot of good tournaments fishing this bait through standing timber, 20, 25 feet deep, only fishing this bait 3 to 5 feet. But you have to really focus and really concentrate on what you're doing when you're fishing this bait down deeper. But it's something you can certainly do. And I've had a lot of success doing that. A lot of people don't do that. It's so much easier to just fish a jerk bait with 3 treble hooks and catch those fish, but it's a different look. And I know everybody's watching now knows, with the pressure that you have on lakes, the pressure you have everywhere, it seems like. Heck, even people kind of found out my farm ponds I like to go fish. There's pressure there when I go there nowadays. There's pressure everywhere. You always want to give the fish a little something different. So 2 big things about the D-Shad. Number one, the way the slow fall and the amount of salt in this bait has that, attractive slow fall. But then also I can reel this bait fast. And when I say fast, I mean turn it. And then it has a subtle swimming vibration and movement, where, with a Zaco, with a button tail, and, a lot of other baits have the same swim, or not the same, but a swimming action, but it's a totally different sound and vibration. And I think, or I know in my career, that's so important to realize that those fish can hear you, hear those movements and vibrations and water moving, thumping in the water more than a lot of people think, if you really stop and think about it. Now, hey, I'm the first one to say my granddad hated for me to talk while we were fishing, casting a Carolina rig 40 yards from the boat. And I don't think that affects those fish nearly as much as what they actually have in their environment. If you're fishing for those fish 10 or 15 feet deep, then, the sound that your bait's moving, the sound that your line is moving, making, the sound that your lead or tungsten or whatever you might be using, they can hear, because it's in their house. It's in their dining room. So big thing here with the D-Shad. All right, so I'm gonna go. I can't help it. I catch them a few other ways. I got my wife helping me a little bit here. Do we good? Do we have a question? We're gonna wait a little bit. Okay, cool. Okay, so I do see one right here. Chris Birch, favorite way to fish it and set it up. Great question. An hour seems like a long time, and like I said, we'll hold some of the questions a little bit, but if we don't answer some kind of as we're going, and before I move to another topic, then we won't get to them. I've had it happen a million times. So here's a couple ways that I rig it, and this is what Davy Hite does, and this is what I enjoy about doing seminars. And this weekend when I'm going to a sports show, there'll be other professional anglers there, and I always like to try to listen in on what they're saying and what they're doing, because we can always learn. Because the great thing about fishing is the correct answer is what works for you, and nobody can say, well, he's wrong. And I'm not just saying that about Davy Hite, I promise you. Nobody can judge and say, well, that doesn't work, he's wrong, when he's telling you, hey, this has worked for me. What you should do is try to learn from other people. So there's a couple ways that I like to rig it. And this is from my old Lake Murray, South Carolina floating worm days. I like to rig it with a swivel, without a swivel. And the swivel, especially on a D-Shad, is not for the twist in your line. It's for the weight. to get that bait down a little bit. So if I want it down a little bit, I will use a swivel. The other thing that I really like personally a lot is this ringed hook. It's a VMC ring hook, and I think you can probably see it right there. You see that little ring on that there? So when I'm just fishing at Texas rig or Texpose, and usually unless I'm fishing in some pretty thick cover, I Texpose it, and I'll explain that. And for you guys that are big time pros and think this is so elementary saying Texpose, please be patient with me, because there are people that I talk to every day that I'm doing seminars or throughout the country that might not even know that. So be patient with me. So I'm going to show the Texpose deal that I do most of the time with a D-shad. So I'm going to go in about 3/8 of an inch, come out. You got your 90-degree bend right there in the hook. And right here, always, and this is very important, especially with a bait that you want to swim, that doesn't have that dominant tail and button. Gosh, I don't know the right way to describe this. So a bait that doesn't have a rudder or doesn't really have a propeller, and I know the button on the back of these swim baits are not, the Zaco and then a lot of others are not really propellers, but they guide and they kind of control the fall of the bait. And you have to think about that. With a bait that really doesn't have that and is slender and streamlined, it's so important to rig it perfectly straight. Perfectly straight. So the thing you have to do if you're going to rig it perfectly straight is know how far to go back with the hook. So before I put the hook through the plastic, the meat of the plastic, I'm going to lay the hook, once I run it through the top there, I'm going to lay that hook there to show me the length of that hook and where it hits that plastic. And I put my thumb right there to let me know that's where that hook needs to come through to make that D-shad be perfectly straight. So I keep my thumb there, and usually you're going to pull back. It's going to be a little farther back than maybe you think. And very important there too, go straight through the center of your D-shad. Okay? Now here's a big deal. Texposed is this. You go straight through, you push the bait forward, and you sink that tip right in the top of that bait. Okay? And that's totally weedless. Totally weedless. Now if I'm fishing at Rayburn, Toledo Bend, back in the day, Santee, Cooper, Lake Murray, if I'm fishing in some thick cover vegetation, that's what I'm going to do. I love this. I love that little ringed right there on the end of the hook, because it gives it better action. It lets that bait move freely. Okay? Instead of tying directly there, I really love this ringed hook. Okay? That's just my personal preference. Here's the big thing. No matter what hook you use. If you're not fishing in cover, which a lot of times you're not, you're fishing over cover or over some kind of structure, don't do this. There's no need to. Don't sink that hook in there. Pull it back and leave it right out there. Mouse trap, ready to go. If he touches it, he's hooked. You need a set hook. You need to make that barb penetrate. But if he touches it, he's hooked. Lay it right there. Perfect. Okay? If he touches it, he's hooked. Wide gap. Let me get into hooks just for a second. I know we're talking so many different things. A lot of Yamamoto. I love the products through the years. I've been with them so long. The type hook you use, there's a lot of plastic in this bait. Use a wide gap hook, because you want that bait to be able to, once that fish does bite it, you want that bait, that hook to be able to come out and hook that fish. Okay? Just something I have to add because it's so important. Because we'll get bites. It's really easy to get bites. It's really easy to get bites, but you had to put those fish in the boat. I've heard so many stories, so many stories about, man, and I just told you so. Lake Murray, 4 days, I lost 2 fish. But I look back on those things and I listen to other people. I listen to advice. I've got some great friends that are the best in the business, legendary friends, and I can name them off. And I pay attention and I listen, because I want to be a better angler, and I can learn from people that have only been fishing a couple of years, just like I can learn from some of the legends that I know, or all of the legends I know. I can learn from, no doubt. So the key is you want to put those fish in the boat. Pay attention to the little things. Pay attention to the little things. How you lost that fish. Was it your fault? Can you do anything different? Listen to other people's ideas. Go out and try to refine your game, because it's always cool to listen to the stories at weigh-in about the ones that got away, but it's no fun when you're in the check line, the line to get your money for the weekend or the week, to just tell those stories about all the ones that got away. Not very often do you win a big event that you lose fish. And I can't emphasize that anymore. I've won a couple good trophies in my career, and I'm so blessed. I'm so thankful with every one of those, especially the 2 AOYs. I can tell you, like, an entire season when I didn't lose a fish that cost me anything. Like an entire season where I never lost I might have lost a 2-pounder and weighed in a 2.5, something like that. But when I won AOY in 2002, never lost a fish all season. And then I can tell you about years like every tournament, maybe not every day, but every tournament, the biggest fish I had on all week, I lost. I don't believe in luck, although there's a lot of stories about me believing in luck. Yeah, I think they're fun stories to tell. But I think it's really, really cool to learn from your mistakes, work hard, and be focused. All right, enough of the D-Shed. I told you there's so much to talk about. I could talk for an hour on the D-Shed. What I want to get to, so we definitely, and sometimes I think I'm overrated as a mop jig fisherman, but then sometimes I don't, because as a tournament angler, I really thought, what do you do as a tournament angler? What do you do as a recreational angler? What do you do if you're taking, I have 2 sons, they're grown men now, but when I was taking them fishing to have fun, should I put my head down, throw a mop jig, and try to get 5 bites a day? No, shouldn't. But when I'm fishing against the best in the world and we can only weigh in 5 bass, put my head down, try to get 5 to 10 bites a day, perfectly fine. It worked out. Not always, for sure. So I want to talk about the Yamacraw because I'm so excited about it. It's new. And you'll understand when I get into it a little bit why I'm so excited about it. So this is a mop jig. The big deal about this mop jig is the living rubber and the length of the rubber, but more so the living rubber. And the living rubber, it is just that. It is lively, lifelike in the water. Now, with it in my hand right here, not very impressive at all. It just lays on my hand. But it doesn't float like the material in the new Yamacraw so much, but it does somewhat. It somewhat suspends, and it absolutely has more action. Back in the day, and I was throwing, not the Buckeye mop jig, but living rubber type jigs that were hand tied in the Carolinas, when I was a kid. That's been a while. But I put them in the kitchen sink. I put them in the bathtub. We didn't have a pool. If I could go to my neighbor's pool. But so I've watched different jigs, the way they stand up and the action that they have. Now, there's times that just the color in the skirt means a lot. But there's a lot of times, maybe more times, depends on water clarity, that the color means just a little. I think general shades like black, blue versus brown, watermelon can matter some, but the action, the movement, the vibration means so much with what's coming through the water. And this living rubber is the deal, in my opinion. Okay, so that being said, imagine this bait. I wish I had a tank here and we could show you, but please trust me. Imagine this bait, lay it on the bottom. It doesn't look like that. That living rubber kind of flares out and stands up. It's a defensive position. Now, I've talked about this many years ago because you watch it and growing up around streams, creeks, rivers, lakes, that defensive position, everything does in nature. When it thinks it's about to be eaten or killed, it's going to try to be as bad as it can be. And usually that is, whether it's a crawfish or a bluegill, when it gets backed into a corner and there's no other resort, it's like, I'm tougher than you. Look at me. And that's what a crawfish absolutely does. When there's no other way to go. Yeah, they like the old saying, you crawfish out, you back out, you try to run away. But when it gets right down to it, the defensive position is what makes a predator, like a bass, really get interested. Those bigger bass especially. just imagine a 6, 7, 8 pound, 9 pound, 10 pound bass with a smallmouth, largemouth, spotted bass. You know, we don't have any spotted bass that big around here really, but in other parts of the country they do. How many baits, how many artificial baits have those fish seen? Hundreds, thousands. They've, you know, the art of bass fishing, professional bass fishing, is what I like so much. You have to do with artificial bait, is to present a lure, being able to present that lure professionally, correctly, quietly, whether you're trying to make a long cast because you need a bait to get to a certain depth, or you're making a short pitch. Make a great presentation with a bait in the right place and trick that fish into biting. Whether it's a reaction strike or just so seductive in a defensive position, it's like, I've got to have some of this. That's what I think this mop jig does, and that's what I love about. There's two different trailers I use, and for years, let me do this first. The flapping hog. And I talked about vibration and all a little earlier. The flapping hog. So you see, there's some ribbed textures on this bait, but this bait looks like a lot of other chunks kind of down this way. It's just something that glides. So this is a crawl I use on the mop jig a lot. If I want that quiet, subtle approach, that gliding approach. Okay. And I've caught, gosh, I've filmed so many times. If kept up with my career and what I've done in tournaments or what I've done filming shows, I've caught so many fish on that bait right there with that very seductive, making a little noise. You see the ribs on here, all that stuff's moving just a little bit. But what I have wanted for a long time is what the Yamacraw is now. Is a bait that'll actually, because that flapping hog, the flapping hog has a lot of salt in it. So once that mop jig kind of stops, that flapping craw kind of lays down or at least gets parallel with the bottom. But with the Yamacraw, they've used a floating material on the ends of this bait. So not only does it swim when you're fishing the bait, or you're hopping it or reeling it, swimming it. I do all of those different things with that mop jig. But when it stops, because of the floating material, it comes up in the defensive position also, which is so, so important. Is it important to a 1 pounder that, man, I'm starving to death, there's a crawfish, I'm going to bite it? Maybe, maybe not. Is it important to a 6 pounder, 7 pounder, 8 pounder that has seen 1,000 jigs in its lifetime on a public fishery? Probably so. Is it going to trick them all the time? No, there is nothing that's going to trick them all the time. I don't even know if live bait will trick them all the time. But I'm so excited about this bait. I'm super, super excited. I can't tell you how excited I am about this bait, because I've wanted a bait that'll swim and also get up in a defensive position really well. And other people have tried it. I've been wanting this since the mid-90s, but there's people that have been trying it for a lot of years. I haven't personally seen one that does it quite like the new Yamacraw does. Crispin knows, and he was all over trying to get this bait and get it to do what means so much. Now, you can put it on a Texas rig, you can fish it a lot of different ways, whether you're fishing it slow like I do the mop jig more often than not, although I do swim it some if I want more bulk, or shaky head. You can do whatever with this bait. The real cool deal that I've seen work so many times, whether it be a hog trough where those fish have been shocked up, put in a tank, laying there. 10 guys have gone ahead of me doing seminars, and you get a bait that sits there and just raises up to a fish that's looking at it and just raises up, although it's not moving away from the fish. You can get a strike so many times, and that's what this new Yamacraw is doing. So love the flapping hog. I will continue to use it, but I'll be using this new Yamacraw a lot. I can promise you. I've already been using it some. I've watched it. I look at it. I'm fortunate enough to have a small lake, a big pond, whatever you might want to call it, right out my front door. When I get new baits, or when I get baits sent to me that, hey, Davey, try this, I can go do it right there. And when I saw this bait, I knew it was what we were looking for, and I've been able to fish it some since then, and I'm 100% excited about it. Okay, any questions? Because I know I've been talking a whole lot, I'll be glad to answer a few. So let's go. Gosh, I hate not to talk about Zaco. I hate not to talk about the Cinco. I've got to talk about the Cinco a little bit, though, I guess, and be somewhat brief because I do want to get to some questions. So everybody knows what a 5-inch Cinco is. So I've got to tell this. Larry Nixon probably let the cat out of the bag. One of the reasons why everyone loves Larry Nixon is because he's just such a nice guy, and he might not tell you everything the first day he learns it, but he's such a nice guy. He can't help but kind of share some of the apple pie, I guess you could say, in fishing. Larry Nixon considered the best worm fisherman on the planet. He kind of clued me in on, Dave, you need to try that little 5-inch plastic bait that doesn't seem to really do anything. It catches a lot of fish. That was a long time ago, a very long time ago. I wish I'd have taken him. I should have known just to start throwing it, drop everything, start throwing it. So I started playing around with it a little bit. It seemed like something to me for whatever reason. I guess it was the time of year that we were fishing tournaments in certain parts of the country. I thought, man, that is a great smallmouth bait. I wish I'd have thrown it. Got stories like that about vibrating jigs too. I wish I'd have thrown it. So, it was the old vibrating jig was, one of them, the most popular one, I guess. It started right here in Greenwood, South Carolina. That's Water Under the Bridge. When Larry Nixon tells you to try a soft plastic worm, then you better try it. And I did, but for whatever reason, I thought it was a smallmouth gig. So 2-3 years later, we're still in the, I don't know, late 90s, early 2000s, probably late 90s. I don't remember the exact year, a long time ago. I realized, man, it's a fish catcher in the whole world. So I can't give it a better compliment. And I love to throw a mop jig. I love to throw, the flapping hog, the Yamacraw on it. I love to do that. 5 fish, big fish. But I get asked the question, I'm sure most of you have, if you had to use one bait, just one bait, all over the country, what would you use? 5-inch, some shade of green pumpkin Cinco. No doubt about it. That's for catching fish, largemouth, smallmouth, spotted bass, clear water, dirty water, from South Florida to the Canadian border, from California to South Carolina. And I've caught them everywhere I just described on a 5-inch Cinco. So there are a dozen ways to rig it. I'll go over a couple of my favorite, just like I was saying, with the D-shad. Now, I fish it wacky, like everybody does for sure. And to me, the wacky rig is just about as simple as it gets. You put a hook in the middle of the worm, throw it out. Whatever hook you prefer, I like a wider gap hook. So I like to Texas rig it or Texpose, just like I was saying earlier. Go right in the end of that Cinco, come out pretty quick, and go up to the 90-degree bend, mark the length of your hook to where it is on the bait, bend that bait back, go straight through there. Very, very important for the bait to be straight. If I'm fishing in a lot of cover, very similar to D-shad. If I'm fishing in quite a bit of cover, then I'm going to pull that bait back, hide the tip of that hook, Texpose. If I'm not, I leave it right there. It's parallel to it. And if he bites it, he's stuck or she's stuck. Okay? That's the way I rig it. That wacky rigged, drop shot, Texpose, drop shot, wacky. I mean, there's a Texas rig, light Texas rig, heavier Texas rig. You can rig a Cinco any way you can think of rigging soft plastic. Now, I don't have the right hook with me right here, but here's something that I know a lot of you know about, but I'm sure there's some that don't. And this is not the right hook, so don't pay attention to the particular hook I'm using. But wacky rig, the back of what I call the egg sac, you can see the little egg sac in the Cinco. Right there, basically in the center, right there, okay? We're good. I do that just like it is. Don't pay attention to the hook. I use a smaller hook. But pretty much in the center of the worm. And it's got that enticing action, been a bazillion fish caught all over this country and other countries like that. Here's something I saw, and Haiti's gone. Hope he's watching right now. Aaron Martin's too. We all love Aaron. He wacky rigged, and there might be a name for it in other parts of the country. To me, it's Aaron's rig. So he hooked that bait about an inch down from, whether it's this bait or another one, but a very different action. Instead of wacky rigging in the center of that bait, about an inch back, pulling it through the water, giving a different action, giving a different kick, giving a different thing. And I saw him, actually, it was my first year doing covering the tournaments as a, commentator on Bassmaster Live. I saw him kick everybody's butt. He was fishing around a lot of people at St. Clair. And the big thing, he was around a lot of people. And Aaron's got, a lot of great things going on. And this, I'm sure this wasn't everything, but this was the most obvious thing. This was the elephant in the room, what he was doing different than everybody around him. Instead of wacky rigging that bait in the center, about an inch back from the top. And he told a little story, Aaron being Aaron, he was just out there having fun, about somebody of his from California, that had taught him that, and he had a special name for it, whatever guy's name was. I apologize, I don't remember, Jack or somebody like that. And if you're watching, send me a text that it was you. But that's it. I see somebody right there. He called it the ghillie rig. It was a buddy of his that, thank you so much, because my memory is just not that good. And I was consumed with Aaron Martin winning the tournament. But he had a special name for it. And I'm sure this person who's watching is perfectly right. The ghillie rig. It was just so different. And he was fishing, against the best of the best. And that was the big thing that was different than everybody he was fishing around. Okay, so 5-inch Senko it's a no-brainer. But let me say this, and this is just Davey being honest. There's a lot of baits like this. There's a lot of baits like this. This bait is different than every bait I've ever, and I've tried a lot of them. I've tried them for salespeople. I've given my opinions here, there, and there's a lot of baits like this that catch fish. I can promise you, I've caught fish on 20 different baits that look almost like this, but there is a difference there. I can promise you that. Okay, so there's something that I throw, just Davey being Davey, that I don't see a ton, and maybe they're keeping it hidden from me. But it's a 7-inch Senko. They make 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's a lot of plastic. That's a lot of plastic. And I'll be the first one to admit, when I first saw this, been with Yamamoto a lot of years, I thought, holy cow, because it feels like it weighs a half ounce, and it might. And I thought, that's a lot of plastic. But, me being me, I like to throw a lot of jig. I like to throw a lot of, whatever bait I'm throwing, I like to throw bigger ones because, as a general rule, you get bigger bites on bigger baits. I've caught giant fish on a 4-inch Senko. I'm not saying it has to be. But just because I'm me, I was kind of drawn to this. There's a couple key times, and I got this white for a reason. It's this time of the year. Gizzard shad in the Southeast especially are a big deal to big fish pre-spawn, okay? Especially in the wintertime. I don't care if you're striper fishing or bass fishing. Gizzard shad, for some reason, it seems like they get on gizzard shad even before they get on the crawfish in the pre-spawn. I like to throw this time of year, pre-spawn, late winter. It isn't even springtime yet now, or even kind of when I use this more in the late January and mid-February or late February. Obviously, I like to throw other baits, but in a clear water situation, pressured, whether it's around boat docks or some kind of structure, some deep point, some standing timber, whatever, I have really had a lot of success on this big 7-inch Senko in the white color, because I really think, does this look like a gizzard shad? Nope. But, a pink floating worm doesn't look like a gizzard shad either. I don't know what it looks like. So, but I can tell you from experience that this is a bait that is not used as much as it should be. The 7-inch Senko, no matter what the color. I've seen times, and it's not just a South thing. We were at Lake Champlain. Gosh, it was a lot of years ago. You know, that's far north. Ran down Ticonderoga. And I was catching fish, pitching a jig, flipping a jig. And I had a co-angler. And then you hear a lot of horror stories about co-anglers. I hate to call them horror stories because they're not. You hear a lot of people making excuses, I guess I would say a lot of times, about their co-angler did this or their co-angler did that. But I was always one to give credit where credit's due with co-angler. And here's the story. I had a co-angler with me who was I was pitching a jig and a 5-inch Senko. And let me see this. Okay, cool. If we need to go over, we can. I'm gonna try to get to the questions, whatever. But just a little note there from my lovely wife helping out here. She wants to be the quiet one. Okay, the store at St. Clair, 7-inch Senko. You know how far north we are? It's Lake Champlain. There's big northern largemouth, Ticonderoga, but you know, a 5-pounder is a real big one there. A 6-pounder is a real big one. Every once in a while, you see bigger than that. But so I really wasn't in that, you know, thought process that I got to use a 7-inch Senko to catch those bigger fish. So I was pitching. There was some scattered grass. I was catching a good many fish. But this is day 3. A lot of pressure. A lot of folks back in those days are running Ticonderoga. Not as many people running down there now. It's kind of gone in a slump, but I think all things kind of come and go. Nature takes care of that. Probably the next term or two we go there. It'll be one there. So you see things go in cycles if you've been around, see this for years. My co-angler breaks out a 7-inch Senko. I was sponsored by Yamamoto way back then. Had a lot of Senkos in my boat. He's pitching behind me. I always took pride in being a pretty good flipper and pitcher in my days. Although we are kind of open water, pitching the clumps. I'd catch a 2-pounder, he'd catch a 4-pounder. I'd catch a 2-pounder, he'd catch a 3.5-pounder. So I'm not real smart, but I can catch on in fishing. If you're catching fish twice the size of me, I'm going to start paying attention. And it only takes one. After 2 or 3, Davy puts on a 7-inch Senko. Lake Champlain now. I'm not saying way down south like it would be real obvious. You might need to try a bigger bait. Put on a 7-inch Senko, changed everything. Absolutely 100% changed everything. And if my co-angler from that day is watching, feel free to give yourself a shout out. I'll call out your name. I don't remember. It's been a long time ago. But absolute true story. 7-inch Senko at times can change things. Now, more fish are caught on a 5-inch. More people throw the 5-inch. Don't overlook this bait. Don't overlook this bait. Okay, so we don't want to run over. Let's talk about the Zocco a little bit. And let's say that to me, the big differences is, and I can certainly explain to you why I think this bait's better for multiple reasons. Got 2 different colors here. We got 2 different tails. Straight tail, button tail. Very similar to what I was talking about earlier. This bait is not going to make a lot of vibration in the water. This bait is. Okay. So let's talk about the first one that I threw a lot is just the straight tail. I think it came out just a little bit before the boot tail. Okay, so to me, when I'm using a vibrating jig, something that's kind of controlling the swim, I like this bait more often. Because when you're using it using this bait with a button tail behind something that's moving a lot of water in front, you got, and there's times I do it when I want to make a lot of noise. But this is my choice. Probably 2/3 of the time, not all the time. I use this on the back of a vibrating jig. So I love this with a swim bait head. But here's the big deal to me. And I try not to name any names, but there's been tournaments won by guys that did things and maybe they weren't sponsored by a certain company and they couldn't say anything about it. But here's the deal. Here's what makes the Zocco part of what makes it so special. There's a lot of jig trailers, vibrating jig trailers, and that's what this is used for primarily. I use it on a shaky head. I use it on, spot remover, different things, but I mainly use it on vibrating jig. So here's what I've learned through the years. I talked about it earlier. You got to land the fish. You got to land them. The strikes don't count. They tell you got great stories. The losses don't count. They make great stories, but they don't help the bank account. So the big thing, if you pay, and I don't have one here, but let's just use this mop jig for example. Let's imagine that this is a vibrating jig. Okay, you got a skirt and you got a hook and you got a lead head. Okay, let's imagine that there's a blade there. So if you have nothing as a trailer there, or if you have something that's very small and doesn't have, meat to it, then what do you have? You've got a vibrating jig, although this isn't. Okay, work with me here. Use a little imagination. So how does a bass eat a lure? Do they have hands? They have chopsticks? They have a fork? They have a spoon? Nope. They open their mouth, displacement water, and they basically got a vacuum cleaner. Okay? That's what they've got. So to land a fish, you want that fish to be able to inhale that bait. Okay? Because if it's short strike or miss, those sort of things, sometimes the fish are just finicky. Sometimes they're just not wanting to eat because of pressure. There's some things that cause you to miss or lose fish. But a lot of times, more times than not, in my opinion, if he goes to the effort to strike a lure, he's trying to inhale that lure. Now, here's what I know also. I had a pet bass when I was a child, and I watched that. I fed that bass. I watched it. The older people that are watching here for sure, I'm sure you remember Leroy Brown. It was Lake Eufaula, Tom Mann. It was a legendary fish that was in a big tank. Love it. I think most people love fishing, love to watch fish in aquariums. Well, I tried to learn, and it was amazing that a bass can be 2 inches, 6 inches bigger the fish, maybe even a foot away from what it's trying to consume, open its mouth, and it goes just like a vacuum cleaner. That's what it is. That's what it is. You have to understand that. So if you're losing fish, missing fish, what's the problem? Like I said, we've all lost them. We all just need to try to get better at hooking and landing fish. Whether you're a recreational angler or a tournament angler, we want to be able to land those fish. Okay. So this is the bait. Vibrating jig. There's a blade right here. Lead head. If you have no trailer on there, or if you have a very slender trailer, because there's some companies that have very slender trailers. It's cheaper to make a trailer that only uses a fraction of that much plastic. Okay. More economical to sell you 6 that only use a quarter of this plastic than these 6. Okay. Makes sense. Don't blame them for trying. And maybe they just haven't thought about how fish eats a bait. So the big thing with a vibrating jig, I'm sure a lot of you have seen, to me, it was like a tube bait back in the day. Why do you lose so many fish? And I'm not going to get into the tube because we don't have time, but I have my reasons there too. With the vibrating jig and a spinnerbait, I use the same trailer that Zaco on a spinnerbait. For a fish to inhale this bait, we talked about, and I think everybody will agree, that fish, whether it's 2 inches away, it turns a vacuum cleaner on. Okay? Let me ask you a question. You ever vacuumed out your car? Is it easier to pick up a toothpick or something that's bigger, more bulky, and got volume? Now, I'm not talking about something that weighs 5 pounds, but basically the same weight, but something that has that bulk to be sucked up. So important. This bait on this hook, the Yamamoto Zaco, on this hook, when that fish comes up, does that, has something to draw into its mouth. So important. It's the best bait for that, in my opinion, that I've ever used, and I've used a lot of them. So obviously the trailer, the action that you have here, the tail, this one isn't thumping very much. It's got a little small appendages there to give it a little bit. But the bulk in this bait lets that fish, when it does this, it pulls in there. I might lose the next 5, and I'm going to be throwing this bait a lot, a vibrating jig with a Zaco on it, a bunch this pre-spawn like I have for the last, 15 years. And knock on wood, I don't lose nearly as many. I hear those stories about fish being lost, but I don't lose very many at all. And a big part of it is because this Zaco has so much plastic in it, and it pulls into that fish's mouth, because that vibrating jig is moving around. It's a lot of noise, and it's a lot of bait with the blade up there, the head, the hook, the skirt. But you need something there with that much meat to pull into that fish's mouth. Okay, so I know we're probably getting lower on time. If there are a few questions I need to try to touch base, if Ricky can help me out, or Natalie, or somebody, I don't want to get too long-winded. We only got about 10 more minutes, so I love questions. I love anybody have any questions, I'll certainly do my best to answer. And the cool thing, there is no dumb question in fishing, and there is no wrong answer in fishing. What I'll do is be honest with you, and what works for Davy doesn't necessarily have to work for whoever else might do. But I can tell you, I've had a lot of experience, a lot of pretty nice catches, and also some losses. But I try to learn from those things to help make me a better terminator. So if I don't get any yet, I'll talk about what else. I thought that was going to be about the right kind of time. Let me look in here to my little bag of tricks. Let's see what else I got. Let's go. Let me see. You got me a note there? Okay. So I can't help but, I think I got it right here. So here's something that, I love a mop jig, and everybody on social media knows that I love a mop jig. It's just been good to me in my tournament fishing career. But here's something that I'll have to admit. I just thought, man, that's fishing for little fish. That's absolutely not. Everybody knows how silly that is, that Davy even said that. It's a spot remover, Buckeye spot remover. Okay. So here's something that I've really been doing just since we got this Yamacraw. No big secret to a lot of you, I'm sure. Be patient with me. I know you're well-seasoned pros. But there's some people or somebody maybe that'll like me talking about screwing literally this Yamacraw right up on this spot remover head. Okay. The other thing that I've not liked about, and gosh, I hate to say not like, but wished it could do, and you just can't make one jig trailer, you can't make one spot remover plastic, you can't, it's like everything else in fishing. You can't fish with one rod and reel, you got to have 20. You can't have one jig trailer, you got to have 20. But in this case, the flapping hog and this Yamacraw really does kind of cover the whole spectrum for me. Here's what this bait does. Number one, and I rig it, Texas rig, 90% of the time. Keep that hook embedded in that plastic. Got that little V there in it to help it come through there. So no secret, no big deal there. But the big thing about a shaky head, and way back in the day, the Alabama guys, Taco was doing it. A lot of, the shaky head was real popular with Alabama anglers, in the 90s, before it was kind of everywhere. And I'm sure there were some other places it was, but to me, the Alabama guys in the Southeast kind of were dialed in on the shaky head a little bit before a lot of the others. And the big thing about the shaky head versus a Texas rig is the bait falls straight down. It's a total different fall with that head. If you Texas rig a bait, especially if that bait swims like this Yamacraw, then the swimming action of the worm, we all use, ribbon tail worms through the years. Heck, I still use them. But a ribbon tail bait or a bait with like this Yamacraw that's got two rudders, so to speak, something that's kind of controlling that fall, they're going to fall at an angle. They're going to come down, at a 45, maybe a little more than that, but somewhere between a 45 and a 90, but not a 90 like the shaky head does. Whether you've got a 4-inch Cinco on there or, whatever, a cut tail worm, that shaky head's going to fall straight. It's a total different look for those fish, and it absolutely is wicked. But the big deal, once that bait falls, is what does it do? Well, the spot remover stands up really well, but if it's got a heavy piece of soft plastic on it, something with a lot of salt in it, then it's going to stand up for a little bit after the fall, which a lot of those bites on a shaky head occurred during the fall, so you don't have to worry about this. But maybe when those fish aren't quite so aggressive, that bait falls and then it hits like the spot remover straight up and down. But then what does it do after that? Well, that's why this new plastic, this floating material, is so important, because with this spot remover on this shaky head, that bait falls and then it stays up at least, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I've watched it a lot, at least for a couple seconds. Okay, I'm not saying that this Yamacraw on this spot remover is going to stand up for 20 minutes, but I'm not letting the bait sit there for 20 minutes to start with. Okay, straight up like that. Straight up like that is where it stands up. Okay, for a few seconds makes a big deal. So super excited. Obviously the Cinco, the Zacco, the D-Shad. But the newest thing that I'm excited about, and the Cinco, I mean, we've got quite a few new baits just in the last 6 months. Very excited about it. Partly because Davy Hite is certainly a jig fisherman, been waiting on a bait like this that swims so good, but then also stands up in the defensive position. But you can use it on a lot of different, setups, whether it's Texas rig, shaky head, on your jig trailer, swim jig, crawling a jig. There's so many different things to do with this bait. And I'll be honest with you, I've been getting some samples, but tried to do it this afternoon and time got away from me. But I'm going to order a whole bunch of these tomorrow, I promise you, and I'll be using this spring. So appreciate everybody watching. If we can get to a question or two, then I'll certainly try to answer that. We're on Eastern time. So it's getting late here in the East. Okay, Brandon, appreciate your question. What's the best water temperature range to fish this mop jig? Well, Davy Hite's answer is all water temperatures, but to be more specific, because I keep it tied on almost always, not so much in like July, August, September, but from October through June, I keep a mop jig tied on. The best water temperature is relative to where you are in the country. Like if it's in the low to mid 40s here in South Carolina, that's cold. And in South Florida, it could be very different. So I try to talk about seasonal patterns, seasonal times. So my favorite is pre-spawn to spawn, if I had to pick apart. Now, where you are in the country, in Florida, that could be January, February, March, April, May. Heck, they spawn all year long in Okeechobee. In South Carolina, that's going to be February, March, April, maybe a little into May. Up north, that might be June, July. So it's relative to the time, the seasonal pattern and where you're located in the country. So the water temperatures, so they're going to vary. The fish start spawning in some parts of the country at a colder temperature because of the season, the length of days. There's so many things. But the big thing to me is pre-spawn and spawn is the time that you need to try to throw a mop jig to catch bigger fish. Okay, Frank, got a question from Frank. Do you trim a mop jig at all, or do you fish it right out of the package? Probably the number one question I get asked. 90% of the time, I fish it just like it comes out of the packet. I helped design the mop jig. The Buckeye Lure makes. Like I said, I was making them helping make some, making a few of my own. Many years from that, it wouldn't make sense to waste that rubber and say, okay, Davey helped design this bait. It's got 4.5 inches of rubber on it. First thing you do is cut 2 inches off. That would be, senseless. So trust me, I helped design that particular bait for them, and that length is what I use most of the time. Don't let it fool you. I'll trust you. Trust me, don't let it fool you. A 1 pound bass will bite that bait. It's not too much. And if you look at it, if you take time, do me a favor, in the swimming pool, your sink, an aquarium, take a look at that bait. And it kind of moves around a lot, but it doesn't look nearly as bulky in the water when you stop it as it does when you pull it through the water. Great question, though. It's probably the number one question I get asked. Okay, why the mop jig and not just another standard one? Two big reasons. The number one reason is it's living rubber. It's totally different. Most jigs are silicone skirts. Great colors. They have some action. Absolutely do not have. Take a silicone skirted jig with a little rubber band around like they do all regular silicone skirts. And put it on jig and take a Buckeye Lures mop jig, put it in the aquarium or in your sink. You can do it in a kitchen sink. You only need water 6 inches deep, 6 or 7 inches deep, and look at them. They're night and day difference. The other thing, and this is what drives up the cost. Labor in this country, especially, costs money. So every tackle manufacturer is kind of driven to want to do things that cost less money. That silicone skirt with that rubber band, I promise you, is cheaper to build than these rubber hand-tied jigs. And they're hand-tied. It costs more to build them that way, but that's the way they do them because it makes a difference. It makes a difference in the way that living rubber flares. Okay, great question, though. What about the Slinko? Wayne wants to know. Any thoughts? There again, different material. That floating material, I absolutely love it. I've used it, last fall. I used it on a drop shot. Jury's out on this for me personally, and I'll certainly, because it's a new bait, I'll certainly take anybody's opinion or advice and would appreciate that about the Slinko. I love it. I absolutely love it for wacky rigging, kind of the middle of the water column, or drop shotting when I want that wacky kind of bait. Got so much action, and that floating material when you want that bait to stand up more. It's very different. And you say the Slinko, it looks a little different, and it sounds something like the Senko, the legendary name Senko, but it's very, very different because of the materials, the action, probably more on the Slinko, although we all know a Senko's got a lot of action. But where I've found it to really be or really excel is when I'm drop shotting or when I'm trying to fish that bait wacky style up in the water column a little more, a little shallower, because the Senko is going to fall faster. It's got all that salt in it. It's a whole different bait. There's times, even a Carolina rig, and yeah, I still do throw a Carolina rig. Don't let that be a forgotten technique, because it will still catch fish. And I heard the stories back in the day. My first angler year, 1997. I heard some of my heroes growing up. I'd only been fishing Bassmaster Tournament Trail a couple of years at that point, 3 or 4 years, I guess. Some of my heroes saying, it's an idiot rig. Carolina rig's an idiot rig. And I'm thinking, I'm leading the LOI. I'm standing in line to get a big check, and somebody's saying I'm an idiot. And I didn't say anything back, but don't let that slip your mind that it'll still catch fish. Okay. Rick, appreciate your question. Offset shank or EWG for Texas rig, Senko or cut tail? Okay, so I personally like that wider gap, the EWG type bait more often, unless I'm in heavier cover. And think about this, and I think it'll make sense. The straight shank or an offset shank doesn't have as much gap and doesn't have quite as much room to snag and grab things. And I don't mean like get you hung. I mean like pull on vegetation, pull it a little harder before it pops out, or, kind of have to shake bait on a limb a little bit before it comes off, not really get you hung. I think it's real important to pay attention to that. I don't think there's any one set answer for your question, offset shank or EWG, but I know I use both. And I think there's times when you really need to pay attention to subtle things like that. Hey, we've all seen there's times when those fish want a bait to hang up in the grass or hang up in, on a brush pile and then pop. And that's when they react, that reaction strike. So I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but just be mindful of that. You need to be mindful of that and what those fish want. That's really dissecting into it maybe a lot, but I promise you things like that matter. Even with a Senko, whether that Senko is hanging in that vegetation just a little bit before it pops out, or it needs to come through there more natural and lifelike. So pay attention to that, and I think you'll find which hook works best for you. Okay, Phil Bass. I think I know Phil Bass. I've talked to Phil Bass. How big is the Yamamoto crawl? It's 4 inches. You nailed it. It is 4 inches. The perfect size all the way around. I'm sure in the future, Crispin and some folks and some of the pro staff will want one smaller and one bigger. But right now, this 4 inch right here is what I've really been playing with it, and a lot of the other pro staff. And I promise it's something I've been looking for a bait that swims this good, but stands up. So a lot of salt in most Yamamoto plastics, and I love every bit of them. But there's times we need a float material, and we've got that. Kenneth Grover, my old friend, I've known him for a lot of years. Thank you, Kenneth, saying thank you for your time. A lot of great information, Kenneth. I appreciate it. I appreciate you, your whole family. Been good to me for a very, very long time. Good friend, Kenneth. Thank you that so much. Great fisherman, by the way. I fished with Kenneth a few times. And like I said, you can learn from anybody. And I learned a few tricks from Kenneth back in the day when we were able to fish something together. Hopefully we get to go again one day. Okay, so I guess that's about it for my time. I've run my mouth maybe a little bit too much. I'm wrapping up. I love talking fishing. I appreciate this. Thank all the folks at Yamamoto for continuing to love Davy Hite and be great for our sport and continuing to come up with new baits like the Yamacraw and a lot more to come, no doubt. Thank you so much. Everybody be good. God bless everyone, and pray that we all have safe travels to the first Bassmaster Elite Series tournament at Lake Okeechobee. Thanks, guys.